Hey people, welcome to episode 2 of the Peak Pursuits podcast. Yes, I got a name together, so let me know what you think of it. In this episode, I talk with Luke Williamson, who is a downhill mountain bike World Cup racer. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, we get into talking about what downhill mountain biking is early on in the podcast. We also talk about where his passion for mountain bikes came from, being from a motocross background in the early years. We talk about what the transition from racing national level to World Cup level looked like and what he had to adapt to race or to compete against the best riders in the world. We talk about the injuries he's had, from concussions to most recently a shoulder surgery, and how that's impacted his riding and the coming season. And we talk about much more. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. So Luke, you're a downhill World Cup mountain biker. To some people, they might not have any idea what downhill mountain biking is. So could you start off by explaining what the discipline of downhill is and what it involves?
Pretty much getting from the top of a hill to the bottom of the hill on a mountain bike as fast as possible. In the same way that, for example, downhill skiing that you might see in the Winter Olympics is done with a start hut at the top and a finish line at the bottom. The bikes have got a lot of suspension, rough terrain. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is, getting from top to bottom as fast as possible, and nothing else really matters in terms of, getting up the hill, or it's just the downhill bit that matters.
Yeah, you usually get an uplift to the top. Is that the same for the World Cup tracks?
Yeah, so in the UK, obviously, we're pretty short of ski lifts and gondolas. So often over here it'll be Land Rovers with trailers, but abroad generally the ski resorts will turn their ski lifts into bike lifts. So you'll just hook your bike on there, and that's how you get to the top.
None of the mountains in the UK seem to be big enough to warrant a ski lift adapted to carry bikes.
No, unfortunately not. I think Scotland is the only place that's got a few.
Yes, I remember a couple of years back, you and we were riding at Gorton Gravity Hub down in Devon, I think it is. Yeah. I was attempting to keep up with you, but you were flying down. It's so graceful as you're just floating over the rocks and the roots. It's terrain that most people probably wouldn't even dare to walk down. But my first memories of you weren't actually, they were before the mountain biking days. It was on the motocross bikes. Do you remember when you came into the primary school grounds harting on your motocross bike?
Yeah, I did actually think of that when I knew we were going to do this podcast, and I thought, I don't know how they really got away with it back then. It was only 12 years ago, I think, but it's crazy to think that they let me in the school grounds with a motocross bike and ride around a field in front of the rest of the school. It's pretty crazy. I can't see that happening now.
No, I was going to say, I don't think they'd be allowed to do that anymore.
No.
What was it that got you into the motocross in the early days then?
So my dad rode motorbikes. He did a bit of all sorts of stuff, motocross, but what he really competed in sort of to the highest level was road biking, so like track motorcycle racing. So he got pretty good at that, and then I guess when I was born, he probably had ideas of me becoming a road racer. So he got me riding a motocross bike, which was probably the best way to get me started when I was young. But obviously things haven't gone how he might have expected, but I think he's happy with what I've ended up doing anyway.
Do you think you appreciated when you were that young that motocross could eventually, it had the potential to turn into a professional career had you pursued that?
Definitely, yeah. That was sort of my dream as a kid. I wanted to be a motocross and supercross racer. I guess like a lot of kids that, do their chosen sport, they want to become a professional, one of the best, and get, do it as a job. But yeah, it obviously hasn't worked out that way, but that's how I used to look at it, and was a great experience whilst I did do it.
Was that up and down the country? Was that national level you got to in that?
Yeah, that was sort of, I guess, what I peaked at was national level. So a lot less travelling than I'm doing now with the mountain bikes. But yeah, it was good. Some good memories doing that.
What was the trigger for the transition from motocross to mountain bikes?
So I guess it was sort of a combination of two things. So I'd started riding mountain biking, and because of because of some of the skills I'd picked up motocrossing, it was quite a quick transition. So once I started racing, I was doing pretty well from the get-go, and also really enjoying it. And then also alongside that, at the time, I'd had some sort of mental health issues. I struggled a lot with OCD at the time, which actually it sort of put me off the motocross, and that was really a big part of it, I'd say. At the time, I was suffering a lot, worrying. OCD gets you sort of worrying much more than you should about these tiny little things. And at the time, one of those things was fumes and pollution and stuff. And it would worry me a lot. I'd get really anxious about being around fumes and all of that sort of stuff. So riding motocross was sort of went against how my brain was working at that point. So I sort of got a bit put off by that as well. But I've overcome a lot of that now. So I quite enjoy riding a motocross bike again, which is nice. But yeah, those were the two reasons.
Do you think you felt a slight pressure even at a young age riding the motocross bikes?
I wouldn't say so. People familiar with motocross would understand the term, but people that aren't probably wouldn't. But there's a classic term sort of that they call the moto dad, which is like a super harsh dad always shouting at their kid to go faster sort of thing. And my dad was never like that, so the pressure, I'd say, always came from me as much as anything else. We were actually quite chill. So yeah, I wouldn't say there was ever too much pressure. I'd say more recently doing the downhill, there's probably been much more pressure than there ever was when I was just riding motocross as a kid.
So did you first ride a downhill bike? It was in France, wasn't it? You had a hire bike just on holiday.
That's right. Yeah. So we went to Leger for a holiday my mum had booked, and it all worked out quite well because I was, I guess, a bit of an adrenaline junkie kid, and riding downhill was perfect, really. And I remember whenever my mum wanted to go away and do, some touristing, I guess, I'd just be just really want to go and ride at the bike park again. So I think I did probably a few days out of probably a week's holiday riding downhill there. But I think every day I wasn't riding downhill there, I was desperate to be there, riding a bike and not doing touristy things. But yeah, that's how I was, and loved it. And I didn't actually do it for a while. It was probably about a year until I rode again when we went back, and then that time we bought a bike out there and brought it back with us.
Bikes have probably changed a fair bit now from the original one you rode.
Yeah, so the first one I rode was a Commencal. It was a kids specific bike, and they actually didn't change for a while. But then the bike we ended up buying, that's whole different sort of kettle of fish to what we ride now.
So living next to Rogate Bike Park, which it's just a couple of minutes bike ride from you, to what extent do you think that influenced your journey to eventually racing World Cups?
Obviously, it's hard to say how it would have panned out if I didn't have it there, but I think it was just, it did work out perfect, really, because I really enjoyed doing it out in France, and we knew if we bought a bike we could come straight back here, and I've literally got that place a mile down the road. So I think really it has helped massively. I could go there after school in the evenings, and at weekends I've spent spent a lot of time there and probably developed my riding a lot when I first started. So yeah, it was perfect having that place just down the road, really.
Is that where your first mountain bike race was, at Rogate?
No, I actually started Forest of Dean do some mini downhills. So I did a few of them. They were probably my first races, and still race a couple of the guys that I was racing with now, which is quite cool.
Did racing downhill bikes feel inevitable after riding them a couple of times for leisure?
I guess so, yeah. It's sort of just the natural process for me, being sort of competitive person. Yeah, it was sort of just natural to go into the racing and have a go and see how I got on. Obviously, like I say, having ridden motocross, I sort of took to it fairly quickly. So it was only natural, really, for me to want to test myself and see how I got on racing.
Were you getting decent results right from the get-go with the mountain bike racing?
Considering, looking back on it now, I was, I think in my first race I got fourth. And that was a couple of the guys, like I say, that I race against now. Chris Cummings, I think, was there. James Elliott. So those guys both still race at quite a high level now as well. And at the time, I think I was a bit gutted. I had high hopes of winning it, I expect, but yeah, looking back on it, it was actually really good for my first race. And I think, sometimes when you're too good from the get-go, it can do you more harm than good.
Gives you too much of an ego.
I think so, yeah. I think you see a lot of the time kids that have to work for it and aren't good straight away sometimes develop and end up being really good in the end.
Were you putting much training into the national races?
I guess really I would have just been riding for fun and probably going to the gym and stuff like that. I got a bit of coaching too when I got into the national racing, but yeah, I guess in that sort of phase it was still enjoying riding and just trying to go fast everywhere, which I guess is just how it's going to be at grassroots level. You just want to try and go fast and make sure you're sort of doing some sort of training.
How many seasons of nationals did you race before you were picked up onto the Atherton development team, and could you talk a bit about that?
That was actually literally 1 year of nationals I raced. So it didn't take long. In my first year of racing nationals, I managed to pick up some pretty good results, and we had a sort of like mutual contact, I guess. My uncle was very good friends with Dan Brown, who was managing the Atherton race team at the time. Don't quote me on this, but I believe he's now the CEO of their bike company, Atherton Bikes. So I guess there was that mutual contact, and I had some good results, so they decided to sort of take a chance on me. And at the age I was at, I would have been, I think, 15 for my first year on that development team, and it was literally sort of, you couldn't ask for anything more at that age. That was sort of the best thing I could have got at the time. The bike I got was sort of one of the most expensive bikes you could buy at the time, and they provided all the kit and stuff. So yeah, and alongside that, I obviously looked up to all the guys on the race team. So yeah, it was a very cool opportunity for me at the time.
Yeah, I remember the initial post you'd put up on Instagram once you could announce that you'd gotten into the team, and thinking, wow, what an amazing opportunity that must be. But what responsibilities or pressure did that come with, being on the Atherton racing?
I guess really they never put any pressure or responsibility on us, but I guess it came from myself. At that point, I felt I was in quite a sort of professional position, I guess, for my age. So yeah, I always just took racing very seriously, sort of dead serious. Anyway, so I wouldn't say it really brought much pressure on me. I always just sort of wanted to win, hated losing, and that's just how it was. So I think, yeah, the fear, the pressure almost came more from me wanting to make sure I won or didn't come second, sort of thing, rather than any pressure from them. They were pretty chill. They sort of gave us the equipment and let us crack on, really. As long as we didn't do anything too silly, I think they were all right.
Did they give you much advice on training and that side of things?
I think one of the years I was on there, they did have a new coach come in, and I got a little sort of training program maybe, but not a whole lot in that sort of aspect. A couple of days riding at the bike park at Dovey, which was pretty cool at the time because that was before it was open to the public. So that was cool, but no, to be honest, not a whole lot in terms of the coaching and training side of things.
How many other people were on the team at that time?
So the first year was 3 of us, myself, Millie Johnson, and Jamie Cable, who was sort of a local lad, and actually was, a big part of building the bike park at Dovey. So he was on the team for that year, and then the second year, I'm trying to think. I think it might have just been me and Millie that were sort of their development riders, and then obviously they had the factory team as well.
What part of racing did you find the most difficult? And is that the same for what you found most difficult in the last couple of years in comparison to the early days?
I'd say the biggest part is probably just the mental aspect and controlling yourself, or keeping a clear mind. I'd say is the most difficult part, which became especially hard when I got to sort of world level. Yeah, just dealing with your mind and your emotions and all of that sort of thing. I was really competitive when I was before I got to World Cups, and I guess I came into World Cups with that same mindset, and I'd say it eventually sort of caught up with me. I think it was the second World Cup I raced, I didn't qualify for, and I was absolutely gutted. And then it sort of shifted, and there was a lot of pressure just to get into the finals, as opposed to coming in and thinking I'm gonna win. So yeah, dealing with my head, I've sort of learnt more recently to deal with that. But yeah, that was probably one of the most difficult things.
How does the qualifying for the World Cup races work then? Because flying or going halfway across the world to race and unfortunately not qualifying, that must be pretty tragic. But how do you qualify for the event?
So at that point, I was in a junior category, so sort of the younger age group, and at that point, just to turn up to the event, you either had to be on a registered team, or you had to have a jersey from British Cycling. So I was on a team at the time, so I could enter the races. That was all sorted. But to actually get into the final as such, it was the top 20 riders.
How many riders are there that are trying to qualify?
Sometimes I think that year you'd get as many as about 70 or something. So the cut-off was huge sometimes, and sometimes the times were quite close as well.
So coming on to World Cup racing then, what does the jump between the national level and the World Cup level look like, and how did you adapt to change to that?
Yeah, so many aspects are different, I guess. First of all, the tracks are very different. It's a different style of riding that I had to sort of learn. Then you're sort of surrounded by all of these people that you've seen on the internet, and they're the best guys in the world, and all of a sudden you're seeing those guys all around, and the pits are huge, and all sorts of different things are going on. There's just so much more going on around you. I'd say more distractions and all sorts. And then there's these new faces that you've never raced, and sort of eventually you figure out who's who as you go along. But yeah, it was just sort of a completely different thing to get my head around. Obviously, I was still pretty good at riding a bike, but yeah, like I say, the sort of mental aspect of it is quite challenging when you get to the World Cup.
What team was it that you were with for the first year of your World Cup season?
It was a team called Propane Factory Racing. So yeah, they picked me up.
How did that come about?
So the results I'd got in the category below were pretty good. So I'd got a message from Ben Reed, the team manager, and he wanted to sort of have a chat to me or my dad. So yeah, that's pretty much how that one came about.
What age were you then?
I think I would have been 15 or 16.
So did your dad travel with you to every World Cup race of that season?
Yeah. In fact, he's been at nearly every World Cup I've raced still. I think this year might have even been the first time that he'd actually not gone to one at all.
Yeah, it takes more than one person often to get a good World Cup result. Did you have a mechanic for the first season, or did that take a few seasons to come about?
So the team did have mechanics, but sort of I guess our arrangement with the team was that me and my dad had to still be self-sufficient, I guess, outside of the pits and the racetrack. So, we had to sort out our accommodation and food and all of that sort of stuff. And being the age I was, I just wouldn't have managed all of that myself, really. And the way things have worked out, he's just always carried on coming along, even now. So I don't actually have a mechanic as such, other than, well, my dad is my mechanic. So yeah, he's sort of got to be there to look after me, I guess.
At the age of 16, you were probably also doing your GCSEs at that time. How did you handle, or how did you cope with the pressure of that at the same time as racing around the world?
So I think I'd actually finished my GCSEs the year before, and I'd gone on to do my first year of A levels. And at that point in life, I couldn't really see much of a future outside of being one of the best racers in the world, if you like. And it had, I guess, fairly recently become a legal requirement to do further education after secondary school. So I pretty much went to the college I wanted and sort of tried to study the things I was best at or most interested at. And at the time I chose maths, physics and geography. And to be honest, I was awful as an A-level student. And eventually, I think the sixth form I was at didn't really seem to want me there if I was going to carry on the way that I was. So yeah, I ended up dropping out of doing A-levels after the first year. So I had to go and find something else, and I studied sport and exercise science as a BTEC diploma in college, and actually found that really interesting and enjoyed that a lot in the end.
Did they support you for the BTEC diploma? Did they support you with your racing side more than the college you went to for A-levels?
I'd say it's hard to say, because when I went and did the BTEC diploma, it was quite interesting, and I actually worked really hard. So yeah, I guess they were all right with me taking the time off. The sixth form I was at before, I can see why they would have got fed up, because I just wasn't putting the effort in really. But yeah, it all sort of worked out quite well in the end.
For some people, racing bikes around the world would seem like a dream, and it probably is to you, but like everything, there'll be some parts that aren't as enjoyable, that most people don't see. What are some of these elements that you've experienced?
I guess there's a few things. That the stage I'm at, it's still pretty much me and my dad funding it. So thankfully, he's got a decent job, and then I go and earn what money I can doing different things. So I guess that's one of the things behind the scenes. But that's nothing. Nothing too bad. Pretty much everyone has to get a job at some point. So it's not all that bad, and I'm lucky to be supported so well by my family. I guess one of the other challenging things that people don't see is sort of the lows of when you have a bad race, and learning to deal with your emotions after a bad race. And when we're paying to get to these races, sometimes, for example, this year we'd gone all the way to Canada and I had a mechanical issue, so I didn't qualify and didn't actually get to race in the end. Thankfully, I was quite happy with how I performed, even if things didn't go to plan. So that one was a little easier to let go of. But the year before, I remember a time we'd gone all the way over to America, and I felt like I was honestly having the worst time of my life. We'd spent all the money to get over there, and it was, I think, my first race back after an injury. I was really struggling, and ended up being much further away from where I would have liked to be than I'd hoped. And at that point, I sort of realised I've got to start enjoying it a bit, or when things like that do happen, you're not going to make the most of the experiences that you could be getting from travelling around the world.
Do you get much time to explore these amazing places that you travel to, or is it all focused on this racing?
So it is fairly focused on the racing, but sometimes we'll get 1 or 2 days around near the venues, and the venues themselves generally are some of the most amazing places you'll go. For example, this year we ended up pitted right up in the hills in Andorra, and it was some of the best sort of scenery that I've ever seen, really. So yeah, we're quite fortunate in our sport that where we're competing is actually sort of some of the best scenery that you'll ever see.
How many races are usually on a World Cup calendar?
This coming year's 7. I think it was 8 last year.
Okay.
Most of which usually are in Europe, and then 1 or 2 outside.
Do they try and clump them together so that the Europe ones are all within the same month, and the ones in the Americas are all in the same month as well?
So I'm not sure about this year. I'm not 100% sure on the calendar, but last year they were pretty good at that, actually. So the first 3 races were done in the space of about 4 weeks. So that was good. And then they had 3 in sort of the second chunk of the season that were one after another. And then the last 2 races were in America and Canada. I missed the one in America, but those 2 races were also one after the other. So yeah, this year just gone, they were pretty good at clumping them together.
What does a World Cup weekend look like? Do you have qualifying on a separate day to the racing, I assume?
Yeah, so this past year we'd have a track walk day, and then a practice day, and then a qualifying day, and then on the finals day, this the year just gone, they introduced the semi-finals, so they'd have sort of two races in one day, a semi-finals and a finals. This year now they're going to have the finals on the qualifying day. So yeah,
So they're taking out the semi-finals altogether.
No, they're moving it to the same day as the qualifying. So they'll have a qualifying and a semi-finals in the same day. But yeah, generally the World Cup weeks, once you get going, they're pretty hectic, and you sort of feel like there's no let up. You almost sort of got your blinkers on and zoned in for about 3 days straight.
Would you class yourself as a privateer now that you're not with a team?
So I'm on a team, but I'd sort of class it as a group of privateers, if you like. Although we're registered as a team, we're not sort of on the. We've not got the same, I guess, budget and things, for example, as the bigger teams have. We're sort of a group of privateers doing it together, and yeah, I guess it is sort of a privateer team, but registered.
How do you get around the European races? Do you have a van that you all travel together in?
Not necessarily travel together, but I go with my dad and a load of stuff. Sometimes we'll sort of link up with people traveling places. But last year I had two teammates from Scotland, so they often had an extra, quite a large journey to do before they even got to Europe. So sometimes we travel together, sometimes not. But yeah, some of the travels we've had in the past have been quite fun. Sometimes, if there's a mate that's going, even if they're not on the team, that we can travel with, then that's good too. Splitting the cost just helps really with getting to the races when we can do that.
You spoke a bit earlier about the emotional stress, especially when your race run or your qualifying run doesn't go as planned. Have you ever considered working with, or have you worked with a psychologist? Because that seems like it's something that's emerging more and more now with the elite athletes. You see them working with psychologists.
Yeah, so I did actually. I can't remember whether it was last year or I think it was the year before maybe. I did start working with a sports psychologist, and eventually the second half of this year, all of those things that I'd been taught sort of really started to work quite well. So yeah, it works better for some people than others. I think some people perhaps see it as, everyone's got a different brain, so it's not going to work the same for everyone. But for me now, I've learnt to use it. I think it does definitely benefit for myself anyway.
What are some of the techniques that you use then, therefore, before the start of a race?
So she gave me sort of a visualization process, and I guess some of it is just to get you in what's usually referred to as the flow state. So that's helped me sort of get in the zone, forget everything else that's going on around me. And then there was other things as well that we went through. I was struggling quite often in the second half of my run to stay focused for the full duration. So we went through a technique for that. So sort of just having something in my head to remind me to carry on pushing hard towards the bottom of the run. So those were probably the things that had helped me the most from working with her.
Yeah, it seems like you've had some pretty bad concussions and injuries over the past couple of years, but in the recent months I noticed that you had a surgery on your shoulder. Can you talk a bit about what that was for?
Yeah, so I initially dislocated my shoulder in a sports injuries lesson in college, so that was quite ironic really. And then the second time was actually, I just recovered from a concussion, and my first ride back I crashed at the end of the day, and popped it out again. So I went probably about a year and a half just putting up with it. And
did that affect your riding?
I wouldn't say so. It affected probably the confidence I had in my shoulder a bit. I was a bit worried about crashing and popping it out. Also, with my training, it did make a difference. I was quite scared to lift anything above my head. Putting my arm in vulnerable positions was a bit worrying too. But no, thankfully, when I'm riding, I'm often just thinking about the riding, and generally, it never really caused an issue to my abilities on the bike. But I was just really keen to get it done and get it out the way so that I didn't have to worry about the shoulder anymore.
How much of a setback would you say having the surgery has had on your training for the upcoming season?
It's hard to say because I've only just got back riding, so we'll see in due course. But it has been pretty massive. It's actually been probably the most time I've ever had off a bike since I started riding a bike. So yeah, it took a very long time. It was always meant to take a long time. That's what the doctors had said. When they said how long it was going to take, I think I didn't really believe them. I thought somehow I'd just, with my motivation to train and get better again, I thought I'd somehow just, cut maybe a month or two off the recovery. But no, they were right. Really, it has just taken a long time, and it drove me pretty insane. Towards the middle of the recovery, I was going pretty crazy. I was worried because I didn't have a job. I wasn't earning any money to go and race, and I couldn't even ride my bike to make the most of the time whilst I wasn't earning money. So yeah, all sorts of stuff going through my head, but really the gym and my interest in just getting stronger and fitter, I'd say, was some of what helped me through it. I spend a lot of time there, and came to realise the benefits of the gym on your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I can see why so many people go.
What have the recovery stages been since the surgery to this point?
First 4 to 6 weeks, I was stuck in a sling nearly all the time, I think. So not moving it much other than a few little exercises. After that, began to move it a little bit more, strengthen it a little bit more. And to be honest, it's a bit of a blur looking back on it. I then moved on to more movement than I initially had, and then more strengthening again. I'm now about 17 weeks post-op, I think, and my shoulder's feeling pretty good actually, but not quite back to normal. So yeah, it's been.
Have you been seeing
a very long process.
Have you been seeing a physio the whole rehab? Well, throughout the whole rehab process.
Yeah, so I've seen an NHS one and then also a private one.
Mm-hmm.
So those have helped things along.
You've had a couple of concussions, I believe, over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
How much of an impact has that had on your racing and your confidence? Because head injuries are serious, even though you can't physically see what's going on there.
Yeah, I've sort of learned a lot about head safety through those injuries, and it is very scary really when you've had it a few times and you know the risks and all sorts. And I'd say thankfully it's not really affected my riding. I'm just a lot more considerate of how I can reduce the risks of any head injuries again. I've become very particular about helmets. So thankfully we've got a very good helmet sponsor now. But yeah, I was very picky about what helmets I was wearing, and making sure if I did get a concussion, I was taking quite a long time, plenty of time to recover from them, not rushing anything. So yeah, I just really sort of became very particular when it came to looking after my head.
So when you've come off your bike and you've had a concussion on the racetrack, do you go and get brain scans, or how does that work?
So I'm well, funnily enough, well, it sounds like I'm being sarcastic now, but when you have a concussion, you don't really know what's going on. So I'm not quite sure, but generally they'll do some sort of scan on your probably a head and your neck just to check there's no neck injuries related to it as well. But from my understanding, a lot of it's still pretty unknown. Like they can't just the scans that they do if you went to a standard hospital probably wouldn't uncover everything. They can't understand everything in the brain. Something that I did at the start of last season was an actual brain scan where you wear one of those sort of funny hats, and that was all arranged through the company Head Impact Trauma that's working with the team. So they're a company making devices that measure impacts when you hit the ground. So at some point,
is that integrated within the helmet?
It's not. No, it's just a stick-on one. So at some point those devices that they've been working on, they did release the first one. They put a second one in the works that at some point should be available. But yeah, anyway, they were sort of responsible for arranging that, and they got a company in that did brain scans. So we'd put one of those funny hats on, and they'd have all of these sort of different graphs on their computer, and they'd actually be able to see sort of where our brain was firing away and if there were any parts of the brain that weren't working as they should. So that was probably more actually in depth than you'd get from an actual
Hospital
scan, maybe. Yeah, I'd say so. So that's probably the most advanced form of scan I've had on my brain. A lot of it's still unknown though when you hit your head.
So these patches that you can stick on your helmet, what does it monitor? The force of the impact on the helmet when you come off?
Pretty much, it's the G-force when you hit the ground is what it measures. And from different research, they will have found, I think it's like 60 G. If you hit about 60 G on an impact, then it's very bad. Basically, I think those are the sorts of numbers. I'm not entirely sure like how they get those numbers, because obviously it sounds super high. But yeah, they've got these different measurements, and on the spectrum you can see how dangerous that is. So if a concussion's not obvious, for example, if you're still feeling somewhat okay and you're not sure, those devices will measure the impact, and you can look at that and then make a decision as to whether you're going to need to sit out and make a recovery.
I suppose another factor that affects the concussion is the twisting of the head when you hit the ground. It's not just one force of your head going onto the ground. There can be roots and rocks that you hit your head on that twist it in a certain way. Does that impact concussion, or is it just the brutal force that
I think
causes concussion?
From what I know, it does all sorts of forces, whether it's a dead-on impact or a rotational one. Anything that's enough force to move your brain around in there enough is sort of what's going to cause a concussion. So yeah, whether it's a straight impact or a rotational force, both of them do that, and you can see that now with how they're trying to combat that in helmets with the different sliding layers and stuff in some of the new helmets to try and reduce the rotational force.
Yeah, I've noticed in rugby they now have gum shields which have sensors in to detect the forces that the players have that are
All
causing
right.
concussions. So that's good to know that it's also being integrated into mountain biking.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know about that. I know it's a very big issue in rugby, sort of
Yes,
the
yeah.
nature of how the sport's played. But yeah, that's cool.
Considering the risk for motocross and mountain biking is fairly similar, what are your thoughts on the difference in prize money?
To be honest, a lot of it I'm not really sure on. I know a lot of the top mountain bikers, if they win a race, the prize money from the actual event is fairly low considering
Mm.
compared to what the motocross riders get paid if they were to win a race. Um, I myself have never really won a very large chunk of money, so I'm not entirely sure what they get from winning a World Cup, but I'd imagine probably more of it would come from sponsorship, their worth as a rider for the next year, and the bonuses they get uh, because of how their contract works, rather than the money from the event. I think some of the guys have been trying to put it out there that they're worth a lot more than what they're being paid from the organisers for the event.
Mm.
But yeah, for me myself, I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to get some better results before I'm fully clued up on the prize money situation.
What are your plans for the coming year, and what are your goals?
Sort of, I guess, same again. I've learned from last year, and just build off of things. Now I've got my shoulder issue out of the way. Like I said, it didn't really cause a massive issue on the bike, but it's something that's now out of the way. I got my eyes tested this off season as well, and it turns out that my eyesight wasn't perfect. I'm far from having very bad eyesight like I know some people have, but it definitely helps having some sort of correction there. So I'm hoping that might help me a little. But yeah, just going again, with a bit more experience, and hoping that I can get some solid results this year, and it will help me forwards in my career racing bikes, really.
Will you be competing in the national level races as well as the World Cups?
Yeah, possibly not all of them, but yeah, World Cups is the main focus. That's what all the attention's on, really, and then select national ones, a few other different races that might be fun or just fit into the schedule, or also any that are going to help really with making sure I'm the best I can be when I get to the World Cups. Having a bit of race practice is always good.
Do you think you'll be going out and doing any practicing in other countries such as France, maybe Léger, the bike parks out there? Because as we spoke about at the beginning of this, in the UK we do have some okay track or decent tracks in Wales and Scotland, but other than that, they're nothing like what I can imagine the World Cup tracks to be like. So are you intending to go out to do some practicing worldwide?
Yeah, so at the moment, the first thing we've got planned is actually Portugal next month. So it's come up very quickly actually. I think we need to decide tonight which day we're going to leave. So there's a couple of races out there, and might do a bit of riding as well. Portugal is probably one of the hotspots now for the UK guys when it's winter. Go out there and do some riding. Hope it'll be a bit warmer and drier than here, and get on some different tracks really.
Will you be doing much testing of bikes out there?
I've got a few things to try. I'm on the same frame and generally mostly the same parts as last year, so that's quite nice. I've not got to get used to too much, but just got a few different things I want to try just out of interest. But yeah, thankfully not too many things, just a few things I can get out of the way and then focus on improving myself.
Yeah, well, best of luck with it all. I've got one last question. Who do you recommend that I speak to next in the future that you know, and what would your reasoning be for that?
So it's quite a random one, but I've got a mate called Antonio, and he's a painter and decorator now, and he's also a very keen motocrosser. But he's a Brazilian that moved over to the UK, and some of the stories he's got is quite incredible and inspiring, I'd say, because he came over here with pretty much nothing, and now he's able to support a family and have all of these different bikes and toys and stuff to go and play with. And yeah, he's just a friend, but it's quite an inspiring story, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like he'd be a good person to talk to.
Yeah,
Yeah, send me his contact, and I'll get in touch to them.
I'll get it across.
If people want to follow along with your racing on social media, where can they find you?
Just Instagram's probably the easiest one, really. At Luke Williamson, Luke_Williamson 14. That's probably the easiest way to find me, really. If anyone's interested in what I'm doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for this, Luke.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation with Luke. I've been fortunate enough to see Luke progress from the age of 12 racing motocross bikes to where he is now at the age of 22, 23. I think he must be racing mountain bikes around the world. And he's an incredibly focused individual, knows what he wants, and so he deserves all the success he's had and will have in the future. And I wish him all the best. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast.